space, and the 90% solution is a much better answer than a ideal 100% solution that is so long from now that isn't going to be relevant when you get it anyway. So I think this whole mindset has changed. Everybody is committed to delivering capability faster. Everybody believes speed wins, not just on the battlefield, but in terms of how you get capability out to the soldier. And we're all in. It's a completely different mindset about how to develop a system of this magnitude.
I'd like to chime in a little bit. What was complementary to some of the decision making that was going on at the time that GD started to ramp up, and I'll speak to the commercial industry. I had a disinterested third party, or rather a couple of disinterested third parties that did analysis for me because we wanted to revisit the idea of commercialization. There's been so much technology developed since the last time we actually built a tank. To be fair, we welded the last Abrams in the 90s. That was a clean sheet from ground up welded structure. How much technology do we employ now? We used to use newspapers back then. You get everything on your phone now. So it's good to revisit old thoughts and ideas. It's not that prior leadership didn't think about ideas. You go to Fort Benning, Georgia, and there's this thing called tank test bed. Has an unmanned turret, 3 in the hull. They knew then what the vision was for the future. They didn't have the technology, so now's been an opportune time. So through third parties, we looked at, well, what's available. The chief had mentioned it yesterday. We looked at Caterpillar. Diesel technology is far beyond what we were looking at even 10 years ago. And we can buy it now from commercial, existing as it is. What enamored me with CAT is I go from an engine that costs upwards of $1 million per right now today, with limited availability, few parts worldwide, to something that is now commercially available, that a chief warrant officer in a division can grab a bunch of broken ones, go to the nearest CAT dealership in your country, and go get it fixed for less than 10 grand and walk back with brand new engines and brand new parts. That's what has changed and enabled us to look fast. Set the mechanical clunkiness aside. That allows us to leverage your industry as industry partners. I don't need bespoke manufacturing anymore. I can go in and I can get wheel talk additive and advanced. Well, okay, where is that? Heavy, thick steel plate is still a challenge. That's a little bit unique. But how much are we actually leveraging that we can implement? And at the end of the day, I've now created a computer on tracks, and that's what GD's ultimate goal is here. It's not so much the 120 millimeter smooth bore. What else can I do with that asset that's no longer a bespoke tank? So with Palantir or Anduril, or you pick your companies, General Dynamics has, and it's a requirement because I have access and own the IP that's going to be on the tank for the architecture only. I can hand it out like candy, and I can have you all build me the apps now for it. And I decouple my requirements from using GD to do bespoke software. That's the magic. Now what do I want the magic to do? That's where we can go forward in the future. That's what the tank offers the chief and the Army.
Maybe to build on that, one more example, just to the question of what actually changed in 2025. And if you come down to the Palantir booth, you'll see an ISVU that's in a lighter form factor of Titan, something General Hale, I think, last year looking at the basic and the advanced, he said, yeah, it's great. And this really meets the CONOP, and those requirements were set, Kepler requirements a while back. But as we're thinking about transformation and contact, could you put in something smaller, right? So you have a commercial capability developed by GM Defense. I don't believe the Army has them widely fielded or broadly bought yet. We were able to work with our commercial partners, work with WWT, L3Harris, Anduril, and kind of integrate in 100 days that software brain that the Army has invested a lot of money and thought into in the basic form factor and bring it into a much lighter, more agile form factor in a very short period of time. And I think in the past, right, that might have taken years, right, to write the requirements, to get the drawings, to do the digital engineering, but also do the manual engineering and double checking the digital engineering. So the confidence in the technology and where we're at today that we've been seeing just in performing on the Titan program is real. And it's not just, it's not just a booth truck. There are 2 going forward for feedback now for further iteration because it's going to change 100 more times in the next 100 days as folks actually start to leverage it and use it in their operations. So I think that's a good example of something that's truly changing. You can see it fielded right now. I think to the broader point Alex mentioned and kind of how Palantir's thinking about this, at the end of the day, you know, when we look at every major great power competition, you know, it's the bravery of the men and women, you know, in this room, out in the war, out in the battlefield, their ingenuity, their innovation, but it's also our industrial base, right? And we see that the American industrial base broadly should be the defense industrial base. And so the way we think about this is the more that we strengthen the operations, supply chain, logistics, manufacturing, quality control, long-term sustainment and planning, as well as the protection of those supply chains, given some of our adversaries and what they want to do to disrupt those supply chains. That's really where kind of Palantir's core business of managing data, taking that data and enabling it across your existing systems to be useful to decision makers, to planners, to systems engineers, to mechanical engineers, and those who are actually bending metal, across kind of creating that agility layer across all those disciplines so that they can use their data to move faster and to make better decisions as more information is available. That's really what we've done. So through Warp Speed and our program working with initially our commercial customers, primarily large manufacturing institutions here in the United States, more broadly across Europe, we've kind of now adapted that and are working with many, many traditional DIB players to help them strengthen their supply chains. But we're really finding, what they're finding is they can take the overhead out of those manufacturing processes in a thoughtful way. It's their incredible builders and digital engineers and folks that are doing all that planning across the industry that now with these tools that kind of liberate the data for them to make better decisions and to then share those decisions with the government, we're seeing a much faster and frankly lower overhead process to get more units through, but also with demand signal then to invest their own dollars to increase capacity to be able to meet future demand. And so that's been a really huge success.
I want to go into that a little bit. I want to go into that a little bit, and Chief, I want to talk to you. I want to ask you about requirements, and I actually see in the audience, Shimon, I see PM Mission Command, who we levied a requirement on for C2 Fix. Danielle, PM UAS, we levied a requirement on for thousands and thousands of drones. Sir, in the building, people live and die by requirements, and they think there is this very bespoke process that we have to get a requirement through the AROC, and once we're good, that's the Super Bowl. We're never going to have to change it again. Do you want to talk about some of the things that you've done that you forced us to change our thinking on?
So I think we talk a lot about it, and I think when Pete first brought up, this is process innovation and really gets to some of that culture as well, and what we've done, and I know Joe is up here, Joe Welch, with describing what it is that we need. I think the characterization of needs for C2 Next was 2 or 3 pages. What we do know is that, and I see this when I go downstairs, on the floor, is American ingenuity, what industry is doing. That's one. We just need to explain what problems we're trying to solve. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is actually getting out into our formations, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday. I do think it makes a difference when you got engineers and you got the people that are building the systems that are actually in our formations and telling us, and seeing what problems we're trying to solve. And I've seen this at every CTC. We're doing that right now, again, with next generation command and control, because they're out there. The people that are working on that, the companies that are working that, are seeing in real time what problems we're trying to solve and how it needs to work. We're cutting old requirements. We're going through, we have a process right now that we are doing to make sure that we are relooking every process or every requirement that we have out there in the Army and validating that, and how do we simplify that process. So we want your feedback on those kinds of things as well to make sure that we're continuing to move in that direction.
I think it's a really important point about the requirements, right? So we build Gulfstream executive jets. Other than the FAA safety requirements and a handful of things that dictate how we design these airplanes, we sit down with our engineering team, our sales team, the user community, and talk about what does the next generation business jet have to have? How fast does it have to go? How much range does it need? What sort of creature comforts does it require? What sort of avionics package does it? And we build to it. And we put it in the hands of our test pilots. We put it in the hands of the user community. and they say what they like about it, and then we iterate, and we iterate, and then we deliver them. In this world, if I can sort of abuse ourselves a little bit, even on some recent programs, we create a very open trade space. So we have 12 requirements that everybody gets through the door, and then we write 1,200 of them so that we can assess each competitor against each other and do it so that it's not protestable. And then ultimately, we don't deliver what the customer ultimately wants, because the requirements changed, the environment changed, theater changed, as opposed to the model that we're moving towards now is partnering and iterating and getting the stuff in the hands of the user more quickly so that they can tell you what the requirements are. So I think this whole world of requirements is born not only out of trying to predict the future, which is impossible, but it's also trying to keep the system out of trouble from a protest standpoint. And we've just got to get past that. And I think collectively we're starting to, which is really promising.
One other comment that I think we're seeing on the requirements, oftentimes what we don't understand that I think industry helps us is that maybe we want a certain attribute, but we don't understand how much extra we're going to pay for it. So I know Ryan may want to jump in on this, but it's like, yeah, we would like it to be able to do this, but then you go and you look at where we're at with technology, you look at how much extra that's going to cost or how much that's going to change the weight, all these other attributes. I think we're not very good. We have gold-plated things in the past, and now we're trying to understand what are the trade-offs, with things. So I don't know, Ryan, if you want to, we've had a lot of conversations about that.
Yes, sir. Sir, I want to thank you and the Secretary up front. Something you and the Secretary have said is, can you operate off a commander's intent only? So what I have had conversations with, CFTs don't exist, but General Kaufman, General Norman, now General Bradley, General Chalfant, when I've been in the trade space for E3, it's what is the commander's intent that comes out of the requirement? And really what I don't want to do is I don't want to misinterpret it to create a P-spec that drive you all as industry into a wedge position to where you have no flexibility to answer what the chief needs. So rather, the way I've gone about it is understand what that tactical need is, and then where I disaggregate it back to industry, and this is where it gets a little bit hard for, I'll say, my team on the engineering levels and staffs is, I'm going to let you choose technically how you approach to solve the problem and give you freedom of maneuver. Because what you think is going to be different than what I think, and you will both balance the needs of your company, because you all have to maintain some profit margin in there, but you will also know what the state of readiness is. That way I can go back to the chief and give them options on, this is your performance, here's what we think is good enough, here's what we think we can afford. So I don't want to overlay a performance specification requirement. It goes back to the digital engineering mill standards and all that stuff. No. Give you freedom, go back to the chief, and simply get the chief to tell me, Ryan, that's good enough, move out. That's the space that we're in right now. And so, sir, I go back to, I want to thank you for that freedom.
So if I could too, I mean, when we talked about going faster on MV75, it was what kind of risk were we willing to underwrite in order to go faster, right? We'll not sacrifice safety of flight. That's an inviolate parameter that we will not violate. But everything else, we should take a look at what we can challenge in order to be able to go faster. And I think that's a little bit of the difference of the culture that we're trying to infuse here is what kind of smart risks are we willing to take? The digital engineering tools allow us to model that and understand what those risks are. But we also got to have a little bit of courage here and to be able to go do that. And so I do appreciate where we're moving just from the communication of what risk are we willing to take in order to get there faster, to get in the operator's hands.
Pete, you want to say?
Yeah, I think it's, a combination of certainly the concept and principles, Chief, you and the Secretary are putting out there but it's also the ability to engage with the operating force in a new way. That's really allowing us to iterate ahead of need in many cases to really shape those requirements. No better way to understand where we need to go than to get these, pieces of equipment, kit, processes in the hands of our soldiers and to get that direct feedback. It's been huge. I mean, the only reason the Army's going to be able to get the ISV utility next year is because we shared the risk.
That's right.
We built ahead of need. It may not have been exactly what you're going to get next year, but it was good enough to evaluate. It was good enough to do the reps and sets to get the feedback not only to us, but to the Army and inform that requirement decision-making. I think as you look forward to improving that process, it's all about finding useful ways to get to that trade decision space. How do we have that discussion on trades? Sometimes, we're in the conversations industry as we're doing those iterations, but then it disappears for a while, and it goes into the bureaucracy. But keeping us as a part of that trade space conversation is huge, and that has happened, I think, with the ISV utility. The other thing is, test and validation. Test and validation, for the ISV would be, 9 to 12 months. And you have made the leap as an Army to do this next iteration with the ISV utility, certainly stand on the shoulders of ISV, but you've compressed that now down to about 3 months. But you've done that because now you're starting to look over our shoulder, look at our digital engineering, look at our test and validation processes that we draw directly from the commercial market. GM doesn't go to the physical. It spends most of its time in the digital. I give you an example. A normal cycle for automotive development is about 4 to 5 years, and it stands on the shoulders of the model year before. Hummer EV started with a blank sheet of paper, and they set that to production in 18 months. And the only way they were able to do that is because of the way that digital engineering has matured and has built the confidence that it can actually reflect. You still have to do, we're not at zero physical, you still have to do the physical, but you can reduce the amount of physical substantially, and the cost saving is extraordinary as you do that.
So if I could jump on that too, so it doesn't even really seem that innovative, but one of the things we did almost immediately with we call it the moonshot, you guys sent your folks from the PM to our place versus us coming to you and doing report outs and doing program management reviews. So we had soldiers and civilians coming in, living in Fort Worth right next to us. So we were adjudicating those things that we didn't necessarily want to do just in the digital. We want to have that eyeball to eyeball, because there is a trust factor here that we got to work on too, right? I mean, there's a bit of trust where we all feel like, hey, we've leaned in before and kind of had the rug pulled out. And so we want to continue to build on that trust with each other, that you trust us, that we're doing the right thing for the warfighter, and that we trust you that you're going to be there with us all the way through to the end of it. And it helps to have that face-to-face at our factories to make that happen.
So let's double click on that. So Pete, I have actually seen you personally at more CTC rotations than most of the people in the Pentagon. As you get feedback from our soldiers, I want to talk about modularity. So I've heard MOSA a whole bunch, everybody talks about open systems. What are you thinking about in terms of swapping? Because generally what happens, and I don't know if Pat Ellis is in here, but he told a good story yesterday. In 2nd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division, one of their tanks still has the first SyncGARS radio fielded. So they're working through like everything from the oldest radios to the most modern, and that's all a modularity trade. So for any of you, but Pete up front, what do you think about in terms of modularity, so you can work off the chief's intent, work off of Ryan's intent as they're thinking through it?
When the chief saw the concept, the prototype for the ISV utility first time, I think it was last October, that is the clear message he gave. This has got to be modular. It's got to be sled on, sled off, and very clear. And so what we've done is we took a look at it. Well, what does that mean? And we've created, we've tried to maximize the ways in which you can modularly add on mission equipment, not only through bolt-on positions that you don't have to think about where you're going to drill the next hole. Let's just drill the holes now. And so we've uniformly drilled bolt-on positions that tie into structure that, regardless of whether it's a Titan or it's a mobile long-range precision strike missile or it's, loitering munitions that you want to bolt on there, you'll have options. We've built a framework for other kind of connectors, but we've also added power. Power is an essential, element of anything that's modular for the most part that's going on these vehicles. And so we listen to the soldier. Where do you want the power outlet, and why? What kind of power is needed? We're working right now across industry. We have a myriad of industry partners right now that are working very rapidly to adapt their systems to the ISV utility as a flame, and that's what we're doing. We're interacting and iterating with them to make sure we understand, those requirements that we can build into the ISV utility. And so I think, mission power is one of the voices that we're getting from the soldiers, I'll tell you. We go down to squad, platoon, company, they don't have enough energy. I can show you pictures of generators in seat belts on ISV troop carriers, and then the gas can right next to them, because that's how they're charging their force. So we've listened to that, and modularly now we need to find a way to add energy storage, mobile energy stored for export and onboard power.
And, so I can add to that. I mean, just to say it out loud, this isn't theoretical. This is real. So working with GM Defense and L3 and Anduril, that power subsystem and their openness in that broader architecture, as well as the ability to throw our sled on the back with our modular compute environment, with modular comms capabilities to enable kind of the Titan form factor to fit in there. That was only through the industry-to-industry private sector collaboration, saying, hey, we got to figure this out because this is really important to the mission and to the customer that needs it. But these aren't theoretical things. The question, again, on transformation in 2025, this has happened and is continuing to happen. And I think under the current leadership, it's only going faster. It's accelerating, and that's kind of really, really exciting in terms of the moment that we're in. I think the other part of it that's really exciting is it's generating a ton of digital exhaust, right? And this is one of the most valuable things as we're working with our industrial partners as they're providing capability to them for their own operations, but also working with the Army. As you're doing more and more digital engineering, and as you're identifying opportunities to streamline certain processes, to recognize that, hey, 75% of your aircraft are commercial, and you have rigorous safety standards, not just in your factories, but in your design processes. That can afford the Army an opportunity to say, hey, where are some of those commercial requirements, maybe even superseding our military requirements, and we can start to collapse the design process and get from 5 years to 18 months to 12 months to 6 months in rapid kind of capability development and deployment. And so I think that digital exhaust is that next opportunity to really drive the efficiency for the Army's capital R, but also little r requirements.
Yeah, and to that point, we jumped right on that when they said, let's go faster. So one of the ways to do that is let's use FAA experimental test criteria, and that will accelerate us to be able to get that test article faster to the Army.
Yep.
And to the Army's credit, they turned right around and codified that, and so we were able to move out, and we're using FAA experimental type in order to get there faster. We'll go back to the full airworthiness, we'll go back into the SRD, but in order to accelerate to the operator's hands, we had to think creatively the way we normally, to get feedback.
Yep.
Okay, sir, before we go to questions, so that's your prompt. Based on your floor time here this year, your floor time last year, and then your first one is the vice, do you think that you're seeing a change?
I think we're hearing it. The big difference is always going out into our formations. I think that's the most important, thing that we always want to do. Last year, I think at this time, we had one mobile brigade. Right now we have 5. In the next couple of years, we're going to have more than 20, and how we're able to move. I gave the example yesterday that even the vehicles and the things that we're going to have inside of our formation, the ISV, Pete's down there is a good example. It's the ones that are coming into our formation are better than the ones that went in the original formation. Typically we don't do that. You buy something and you have it for 20 years, but it's going to have a better engine and a better transmission. I think we're doing the same thing with, next gen command and control. We've done the same thing with next gen squad weapon that, they're taking soldier feedback and getting better. So I think the proof is really out in the formations. And I talked about this yesterday. That's our customer. That's the most important feedback that we get, and we appreciate when industry is out in our formations with us to get that kind of feedback.
Thanks, sir. Okay, we've been up here for about 35 minutes. I would open up for questions for the rest of the time. Rules of engagement are pretty simple. Please just come up to the mic, ask a question. What I would ask is no grandstanding, no sales. Like if you have access to Army senior leaders and folks who are doing it, we're open to questions.
I'm surveying the room as well to see what kind of, well, who can help with these questions.
If you get there at the same time, you have to rock, paper, scissors.
Alex, there's open source reports that the Russians are producing 4,000 drones a day. So there's been a lot of talk this week about unmanned systems, but this volume aspect of it, and there's an asymmetry because they're at war and we're not, so they can produce that much. And Chief, I don't think you could get the money to produce 4,000 a day, but how are we going to contend with just this mass of this new form of unmanned warfare?
Okay, I talked a little bit about this yesterday. First of all, what we're doing is, we are getting for us, what's important is being able to operate this. What often goes, we end up talking a lot about the tech, but how we're organized, changing. People skills is a big part of that. I mentioned that a little bit briefly yesterday. And I also talked about Sky Foundry and what we're working to do. So, Army Material Command is already working on this to be able to produce the parts and the drones. We're doing this depending on what level that we are. I'm confident that we could, this is why we talk about commercialization. How do we help out commercial industry? How are we doing the things to make sure that we're keeping the cost down? How do we share the risk in some of the hard, we talk about brushless motors, wiring harnesses, and those kinds of things, and that's what you're going to see us, starting to do, whether it's at Toby Hanna, Redstone, Arsenal, and Rock Island, that we can help with this to make sure that we can produce at scale. And then again, it's going to be back to, this is why we talk a lot about commercialization. And what we're doing with the tank is that, and really all of our vehicles, is taking what's out there in our commercial industry and making sure that we're taking advantage of it.
Shameless plug for PEO Aviation. Major General Phillips is back, or General Phillips is back there. I know PM UAS was in here. Danielle, they're standing up the UAS marketplace as well, so that'll go.
Do they want to add anything?
We're happy to add.
Go ahead. It's all family here.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate the opportunity. We absolutely are going to scale our UAS production across, not just with AMC at Redstone, out at the arsenals, but with industry. We're going to invest in industry this year, and we're going to give industry every opportunity to step up. And what I would offer is we need that supply chain to step up with our industry partners.
My name is Jürgen Rauhlater at Georgia Tech. I'm a professor there, and so naturally my question is about education, continuing education, and the workforce. So scaling up capabilities and so on only comes with the right workforce. Do you feel inside and outside the Army you have the workforce in quality and quantity, meaning the right skilled workforce? Inside and outside the Army, really, because you need to build the things, but then also on the battlefield, somebody mentioned on the panel last year that like a repairman, a technician, somebody with hands-on skills on the battlefield can make a hell of a difference, fix 2-3 tanks or systems, and that makes a difference for the soldier. So again, inside and outside of the Army,
Yeah. So one of our last Transforming in Contact rotations, that's one of the things that we were solely focused on. So I will tell you is that we are really focused on that. We just stood up Transformation and Training Command. I don't know if General Dave Hodney is in here, but this is something that we are very focused on. And I would give you, there's a couple of things that we're doing to get after this, and we have been partnering with Arizona State University. It does a lot of this stuff. Using the latest technology to help with learning. One of the things that we just had a advanced readiness team that was out in Hawaii. How are we training out there so we're not upscaling across our Army and doing it in a way, same thing in Europe and do it in places. So I think we're going to change our training model, take advantage of the technology that can help us do that can plug back into things. I talked yesterday about, we have a credo with Meta. We're using the AR, VR glasses that we are right now doing telemakeintenance on. We've had this conversation, for example, with GM that we can, tie in immediately. You don't have to be the expert, but you can tie into the expert who can help you with the kind of things that you need to do that can help you repair the vehicles. And then working obviously towards being AI enabled, and as you start to collect all of that, we have part of this too is, I always tell the story of when we moved 2 batteries of HIMARS out to Hawaii. We've done that in the last 9 months. We were able to do a lot of this because we understood what our formation was and looking at, becoming data centric, understanding what skills we had in different locations. So, that is enabling our decisions. So I think we're doing better at that. Last thing I would say is I would invite you out to our formations and just see how good our soldiers are with technology. They've grown up with it. We're just getting ready to meet with a whole bunch of battalion commanders and sergeant majors, and that's one of the things that they say. They're very quick with it, and I think anybody who's been out in those formations can see, they're very comfortable with it. We're trying to decide, where do we need maybe some more data scientists or systems analysis? Do we need to make some adjustments in the people skills, with that and how we have in our formation? We are growing some drone operators. We are increasing on electronic warfare. So we're doing all that. And as you rightly point out, I think the people skills, again, I talked about the organization and the people skills. I think those are the most important, oftentimes transformations that you need to make, and long lasting.
Yeah.
But if you want to help us, you're down at Georgia Tech, we're happy to have you.
We already helping, I think, by pumping out the engineers, and I know, Alex, you're Purdue. That's okay.
Okay.
Friction.
Yeah, all good. No, but we
Healthy
already
friction.
we're working with the Army a lot, and many of our graduates are going there. The Aviation and Missile Center or so, or PO Aviation or so, and get to evaluate the technology that Bell produces, for example, on the vertical lift side, and so on. So we are already working together, and I think this is very important, not to see like the educators it's important to see them as kind of part of the ecosystem.
An extension of I agree with that completely.
Yeah. And if I can say, if you think about our, Palantir is very fortunate because about half our business is commercial, half is global government, and we're primarily working with those great data engineers and software engineers who are building on top of our platforms. More and more, it's not a Palantir person building, it's actually, it's a green suiter, right? It's an ORSA, it's somebody forward deployed who understands the mission, has the skill set. They've done the work up at AI2C. And what we're seeing is the Army's builders and their ability to build, plus the ethos and the mission fixation. When I compare it to some of the work that's happening on the commercial side, it is truly world-class, right? This isn't, the 30-year-ago version of it. Like, the young men and women who are digitally enabled, they want to go solve problems. They'll go home and watch some YouTube videos, come in the next day and try to figure out, how do I actually solve this problem? When you give them the right tools, you give them the security framework around it, and you give them the data and ontology or something that enables them to start from kind of a place that's already kind of curated, not start from the command line, it's incredible what folks are building. So I think it's a huge credit to the Army for how far it's come and how quickly to driving that kind of builder ecosystem.
Another shameless plug, Master Sergeant Huff, Major Adams, they're up there on my team, and when the chief, the secretary, the vice, the under asks for something on either their dashboards or for workflows for how the Army runs and changes, they are the actual people doing the work. So it's a wholesale change.
Hi, thank you for doing this. Meredith Roten, Janes. I was hoping you could give General George an update on where you are with the core process and when you sort of hope to be initially complete with that process, and if you have some sort of reporting that you can do publicly on how many requirements were invalidated and things like that. Thank you.
Okay, I won't have any big reveal for you here, but so I don't think we'll be done with the process. So we are, using the technology available to basically go back every requirement that we had on the books. And I don't remember Joe's in here, so we can remember it's like 2,000 and something. So I would say they fit in different bins of, what are required, we would look to, there's been a whole bunch of requirements that we've just looked at and said, we don't need that anymore. Those are old requirements, we're not going to do that anymore. We looked at other things and said, okay, we might need to modify those. Those are out of date, with what we're doing, but we still need that capability. How do we do that? We've looked at things that we say, yeah, it's a requirement, but we're not spending money on it. Should we actually, should we continue to invest in that, or maybe should that, go away, and how do we simplify that? So it's pretty much a continual process. I would say every time we get together, and this is the other thing that we're trying to, choose, rather than look at every system when we do the requirements process. If you're going to come in and talk about a drone, there's a lot of other things that go, with that are part of the broader ecosystem that we are looking at, more holistically. So we're happy to, if you want to come, sometime and just kind of understand what we're, doing with the process. And Joe, I don't know if there's anything you want to add. I'm putting everybody on the spot because I can. So.
Yeah, so the only other thing I would add is that in the invalidation process, there are some things that we're not sure we need, and we are saying we're not sure that we need these, and we're sort of putting the burden back on parts of our institutional army. If you care that much about it, if you think it's that important, come back on. And when we don't hear anything, it's an indicator to us that maybe this is something that's outlived its usefulness and needs to be thought of in a better way. That was the only other thing I would add, Chief, to the. I think it's a continual process, as you said.
Thanks, Meredith.
Good morning. John Conger, former OSD official. My question is, Congress has been known to introduce inefficiency, both the policy and the budget processes, as we're seeing today. Are any of these things that you're looking at changing constrained or imposed by Congress in some other form, and are you going to need help in order to make the processes improve and to do the acquisition reform you have envisioned?
Do you guys want to take that question? Yes, we are. I mean, we have a lot. I'll give you a couple of examples. And again, I talked about this yesterday with, budget line item consolidation, where we used to have broad, authorities to spend on capabilities and not necessarily very specific items. So, we are working that. What we're trying to do, and this gets to I think what we talked about up front, the open conversation, is make sure we're doing everything that we are ready within, what our authorities are to make sure that our house is in order, while we're also having the consolidation with Congress about that exactly, which doing budget line item consolidation. Where do we need to have multi-year? So I'm encouraged that, we're going to, we're moving in the right direction with that. And I do think there's work to go. The other big thing, and again, we're going to talk about it here in a couple of weeks, is how do we streamline internally our process so we're not, doing, and I think you were Lisa was mentioning the stovepipes that everybody's having to deal with. When somebody comes to the Army as a customer, they have somebody that understands what we need. They have, people that understand the acquisition program. They have, contracting, and all of that is wired tight. So we're working on that as well.
Thanks.
And a lot of that is tied into Meredith's question on the requirements. So being able to, the PEs, there's stuff in them, and people like to protect their stuff. So to get at the chief and the secretary's goals of making sure we're doing the right thing, we can't have all of those be individual lines. We need the agility by compressing those. Like, that's the why.
And I'd just offer a follow-up thought. You could ask for the money that way too.
That's exactly.
And
the other thing that that we've had a lot of discussions on is the same thing for RDT&E is, and Pete, I've had this discussion, I know when I've been up at Detroit and seeing GM, is, where are we spending our money on, innovation, research, science and technology, because we have a lot of these companies that are doing that we can't match them in what they're doing. So maybe there's other ways that we can spend our money that can help, the broader community to do things. And so I know like GM spends billions of dollars on, doing, on R&D, we shouldn't be investing in the same thing. So, I mean, again, that's internal that we are making those kind of adjustments.
And I think, industry has a role here also to go back into the commercial. And there might be cases where the military requirements and needs can help shape commercial. And if we can do that, for us, that's a superpower, because then you get to a whole nother level of economic scaling and opportunity for the Army. And so we want to make sure we're in the right conversations, we understand the terrain. The commercial market invests an immense amount of dollars in research and development. I'm not trying to compare, apples here and oranges, but, GM as a commercial company invests more research and development than, let's say, the top 5 defense contractors combined. Okay, and people don't realize that. I mean, it's the American way of life out there, and competitiveness in the market drives that research and development to have your product sold in your market. It's got to be differentiated. And the only way it's done is through innovation. And the only way you get innovation is through investing in that research and development. And so we need to find ways, useful ways, not just GM and the automotive, carryover, connectedness and other aspects, but other, commercial enterprise across. I think we had a conversation beforehand here, about the industrial base being the defense base, it's huge. It's really important. It's vital. I mean, you go back in history, go to a history lesson, go read Freedom's Forge, it'll stand out and clear, World War II was all about industry. We will never take an ounce away from the valor on the beaches of Normandy and beyond, but what won that war was industry coming to the table and delivering the capabilities to soldiers, and they self-organized. A lot of good commander's intent, by Roosevelt and others, but they self-organized, and it was through the sheer will and ability for American industry to step up to the plate. GM, has been in there since World War I and beyond, but then there was a gap, right? Automotive industry had a little bit of, financial straits, and one of the bill payers was the defense part of that. And then I think at some point the senior leaders of the company realized that large, American iconic company like GM has to be part of the solution. It's going to happen, if the big one, comes. Better to be in this area now and be part of the conversation.
Maybe just to add on to that, because I think there's an interesting component here that I don't know if it's a congressional thing or a policy thing, but there is this question of kind of what the full life cycle cost of a thing is, and I think the Department of War knows what that looks like for their programs, and to some degree knows what that looks like for their programs over the full 20-year life cycle of a particular bespoke thing. I think the commercial side isn't well understood. One of the big questions that we get, certainly at Palantir, is just, hey, how do we think about profit margins as an example, right? You're a software company, the incremental cost is X. You spend a lot of money in R&D, but what should the gross profit margin look like? I can tell you for the 18 years before we were a profitable company, as in 2 years ago, I think, we spent a couple of $1 billion at least, not just our own money, but that of our investors and that of folks that wanted to invest in this great idea, knowing that it was going to be critical to kind of the future of war and the future of kind of how we fight as a country. And so we're very fortunate to have that timeline and that kind of depth of belief to get through that. But if you can't then be rewarded on the other side of it in a reasonable way, that's just looking at the snapshot of a moment, not that 20-year life cycle, it makes it really hard for the private sector then to continue to invest. So that's maybe one thing just from a policy perspective that isn't really well understood yet. And I think both from an assessment perspective as well as from an overall congressional kind of looking at the numbers and thinking about how it all adds up is something probably we need to do more education around and help with.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, no more questions. All good, Alex?
No more questions? Okay. Wow. I'm going to wrap it up here, and I know that the chief is going to go out to his next engagement, so we're going to break contact here. But I just want to wrap up where the chief started. Transforming the mobile brigade combat teams, getting the infantry squad vehicles out there, getting next gen C2 not to one division, but starting on the second division. Moving away from a FATEDS to the artillery execution suite. Major General Lozano, the PEO Missiles in Space, announced the replacement for FAD C2 this morning. Next gen squad weapon, making sure the Ranger Regiment gave us good feedback. Soldier-borne Mission Command. The MV-75, cutting material on 3 aircraft, milling out the first M1E3 pre-prototype, getting LTAMs into the Pacific. JIATA 401 for counter UAS, Detachment 201 for innovation. That is your Army over the last year. So if someone asked, how can we make sure that you're showing progress? We are showing progress. So I want to thank you. Sir, any last words before we get off the X here?
Thank you all for coming.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all.